Hey friends, welcome back. This is Ashley with Uncommon Roots Homestead. So today, obviously, we are inside. It is pretty late. It's dark outside if you can see out this window. So I'm not going to be taking you outside in the garden, but what I did want to talk about is what happens when we have to bring our garden inside. So it is early November 2021 and we are coming up on our first frost here in Zone 7A, East Tennessee. So if you're not familiar with the USDA zoning system, that's okay. Your frost date has nothing to do with your zone. A lot of people are confused by that. I was confused by that in the beginning. So just because I'm Zone 7A and my first frost is happening this weekend, that does not mean that your first frost is happening this weekend if you're also in Zone 7A. You might have already had your first frost weeks or months ago. So it's really important to make sure that you're following not just the USDA hardiness zone, but also looking at the first and last frost in your specific area. You can do that by looking up your zip code and literally just Google first frost 2021, insert your city name. So anyways, that's not perfect either, right? My first chance of frost was about 2 weeks ago, but what I've been doing is watching the 10-day forecast to look for my first actual frost. And so, according to the weather, that's coming, and it's coming soon. So in just a couple of days, our temperatures are going to drop below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which means we're going to have our first true frost. So that can also happen a little bit warmer. You can get a frost on the top level at like 34 degrees. So just watch for your first chance of frost. But anyways, what that meant is that all of my citrus trees had to come inside. So citrus is not hardy in Zone 7. So another cool thing about hardiness zones is that they can help you determine what is able to grow outside in your zone and what is not. Because the hardiness zone is actually the lowest and highest temperature that your zone generally, right? No one knows what's gonna happen tomorrow, but generally the lowest and highest temperatures that your area ever has. And so for citrus, most citrus is only hardy to zone, some citrus can do zone 8, so we're kind of on the border there, but most is like 9 to 11. So that means that here in Zone 7A, any citrus that I grow has to come inside during the winter to be overwintered indoors. So I want to talk about both overwintering outdoor plants, is what I call these, because these live outside most of the time. They are not my house plants. But also I want to talk about how can we care for our house plants in the winter, because we're coming up on the growing season where most of us are going to be inside. Our friends in Australia are entering their actual growing season and I'm pretty jealous. But what goes around comes around, and ours will be here before we know it. So if you're like me and you have some citrus plants that maybe you bought at the hardware store in the spring, like this is a Calamunden orange, I have a lime, I have a lemon, and then I have another lime. So I have 2 regular limes, 1 Meyer lemon and 1 Calamunden orange. So this Calamunden orange is 3 years old. This is his 3rd winter inside our house. And at first, the first year, he really had a rough time. And that's because I just brought him inside. I didn't know that to overwinter a citrus tree, you actually had to take care of it a little bit differently. I thought, well, you know, it gets too cold outside, I'll just pull it inside and that's that. Well, not true. There are a couple of things you have to keep in mind when you're bringing plants indoors or just tending to your normal house plants in the winter. So first is light. So you want to make sure that your plants are getting an adequate amount of sunlight or artificial light in the winter months. So for most of us in the winter, the light that we get is way less than what we get in the summer. We're talking about, you know, less than 8 hours of sunlight every day. And it's really rare that any of us have a home, unless you have a specific greenhouse for growing, that a window is going to get that amount of sunlight. I set them here by the back door. And this area gets about 4 hours of direct sunlight every day. That's not enough to keep these plants healthy. So what I have to do in the winter is actually supplement with artificial light. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can buy LED lights, similar to the one that I'm actually using to illuminate this video. You can buy specific grow lights. That's gonna be like your tried and true method, but can be a little bit more expensive. What we've done in the past is actually use the same lights that we use as grow lights in the spring. And those are just LED lights that hang overhead. We'll put these in an area with those on top, making sure you can actually burn your plants at this stage too. So you want to make sure that they're about 12 inches away depending on the voltage or the watts of your light. And then you want to just make sure that you're turning those off in the evening. So you don't want to leave the light on 100% of the time, because these plants don't ever want 100% of sun. They were intended to be outside and to get daylight and then night and have those kind of fluctuations in temperature and light. So light is the first thing you have to be aware of. Second is temperature. So even these citrus trees, if we were in maybe Florida or Arizona or another climate that was in a little bit of a warmer zone than I am here in East Tennessee, the temperature would still fluctuate, and so would the humidity, in a way that our home does not. And so I have to make sure that wherever I place these, it's going to be a pretty steady temperature without too much variant and without too much heat. So actually where I have these right now, there's a vent right under these. This is not an ideal place to leave these plants all winter long. I have them here for now because we just moved them inside. We're still in those like in-betweens where I can shove them outside if the days are going to be a little bit warm. But what I really need to do is move these to an area where they're not going to have hot air blown on them directly, but where the temperature is going to be a little bit more regulated. What I also try to do is spray them with a little bit of water to keep the humidity regulated. So just getting a spray bottle to mist them every couple of days is really helpful. If you have a bathroom that gets a lot of sunlight or the ability to do artificial lighting in your bathroom, that's a great option too, because that steam from the shower gives them that level of humidity. But you want to make sure it's not too hot in there too. So there's so many factors, but temperature is huge. So light, temperature, both important to making sure that your outdoor plants stay healthy indoor for the winter. Now, there are some things that you'll notice with your plants when you bring them inside, especially with citrus, that's worth noting. So if you can see here, some of these leaves are actually yellowing a little bit. I'll show you some that have fallen off. That's okay. This plant actually needs to go dormant. It doesn't need to stay active all winter long. And that's true for a lot of plants. So if you have a fig tree, you can actually move that into like a garage or a basement. You actually don't need to supplement it with light because it isn't meant to be in a zone where it would stay alive and blossoming all winter long. So it's important to understand the type of plant that you're growing so that you know what its needs are. For these citrus trees, they would stay green and they would continue to grow all season long. Some of them just are going to fluctuate a little. They're going to lose some of their foliage, and that's okay. Okay, so the last and maybe most important thing that you have to keep in mind is water. So light, temperature, water. Easy, right? Well, easier said than done. Most people, when they bring their outdoor plants inside for the winter, end up overwatering them, not underwatering them. That means we see the plants every day and we think, oh, maybe they're thirsty. We're not used to being so close to our plants. Even the gardeners and those of us who, are out in our garden every day, we're maybe not keeping quite such a close eye on our plants as we are when they're right inside. So one of the things that's really important that we have to do is make sure that we're really listening to the soil and only giving water when it needs water. So these plants in these containers, they stay moist for about a week here in my house. So I try not to overwater them and give them too much water at this time. Now, one thing that's unique about citrus is that it actually flowers and fruits in the fall and the winter. And so most of these plants right now are actually flowering and starting to produce some fruit. So that means that it's a good time for me to fertilize, making sure that I have some good healthy soil on top, and then making sure that I'm keeping it moist and not letting it get too dry. Now, I have an olive tree up in the other room that I brought inside. That olive tree likes it dry. So you got to think about the climate that these plants are supposed to be growing in and then try to replicate that. And unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all. If I had a fig tree, an olive tree, and a calamundan orange tree all lined up next to each other, they're all going to have different needs, especially when they come inside for the winter. So making sure that you're staying on top of the watering and not letting it go too long, right? If you notice that your leaves are getting dry and brittle, you need more water. Often when you notice yellowing, you're probably giving it a little bit too much water. And I'm noticing some of that on this plant, so I'm gonna make sure I don't do that. You also can see yellowing and it's not getting enough sunlight. And I've noticed that my calamunden, when it comes in for the winter, it gets a little bit more yellow no matter what I do. So kind of keep all of those things in mind. Make sure that you're looking up your individual variety that you're growing and kind of learning what is unique and normal for that variety. But those are my best tips for keeping your outdoor plants and kind of bringing your garden inside, which is silly but also exciting. I love the fact that I've got maybe a dozen limes growing and more calamunden oranges right here in my house, and in the middle of winter we'll be able to harvest those. And there's something so cool about that. So I'll probably always grow citrus. And fun fact, if you're in the United States, usually your big box stores like Lowe's, Home Depot, right now you can grab a lot of these for like super clearance because they're going out of season and they're gonna die if they stay outside at those stores. So make sure to go check, and maybe you can pick up a calamunden orange or a lime or a lemon for yourself. So I do have an honorable mention while we're talking about bringing your outdoor plants inside and how to take care of them, and that's pruning. So most of these plants are not at the age that I want to prune them yet, but if you have, maybe next year for this calamunden orange or in the next couple years for my limes, when you get to the point that they are getting a little unruly and they need to be pruned, this is the time that you want to do that. So if you're bringing a plant in that's been out, usually you will have kept it in a container. That's my best recommendation. Plants don't really like to be buried and dug up and buried and dug up and buried and dug up multiple times throughout a season. So making sure that you're keeping an eye on them, keeping them in a container that's the right size for them. Right now I've got 3-gallon containers for my large lime and my calamunden orange, and I have 1-gallon containers for my smaller lemon and my smaller lime. I'll make sure to keep an eye on those throughout the season, and if I need to, throughout the winter. And if it looks like they're having a lot of new growth, which usually they don't have a lot of new growth in the winter, but if they did, I would just pot them. But I'm guessing they'll stay in these containers through the winter, and then in the spring, I'll actually give them a little bit larger space. I'll move the 2 smaller into these 2 3-gallons, and then I'll grab a 5-gallon container. Usually that tops out somewhere around like those big like half whiskey barrel size containers. That's about as big as I will go with plants that I need to bring in and out and in and out. And that's usually enough space for their roots. They'll start to kind of get circular, and you can almost treat it like a bonsai. You're just training it to live in a smaller container. And then you have to prune accordingly. So any of the new growth or new shoots that are coming up from the side, I'll trim those back in the fall or winter, and then kind of let all of that growing power isolate into one stem. What I didn't know about citrus that I know now is that citrus likes to grow similar to a fig and kind of shoot up all of these other little plants from one original plant. And it grows kind of wild. It doesn't grow like a normal tree unless you train it to. So what I've done with my lime is support it and push it up against this window. I'm gonna get a stake and actually stake it so that it'll grow up and not out. But you want to make sure you're keeping an eye on these plants and pruning them here at the beginning of the cold season versus, doing it in the middle of what would be their dormancy or doing it in the spring. It's really best to do that before they start to like enter that calm of the winter. So that's what I'm going to be doing as well. So I figured it deserved an honorable mention. Also, making sure that you have the right pots, the right soil. Some people will wash their plants before bringing them inside, spraying them with a soapy water mixture, kind of getting all the bugs out. I don't usually do that. I guess maybe we have more bugs in the house than other people would. I don't notice a ton of bugs in the house, so I guess if I did, I would see that. I mean, I check them. I make sure I'm not like bringing in a whole host of pests, but for the most part, they seem pretty clean. Sometimes I'll spray them off with water if there's anything on them, but that's pretty much how I care for all of the outdoor plants I'm bringing in. And what's crazy is it's actually pretty similar for my house plants. So I just try to make sure that in the winter, all of the plants are getting proper sun, proper water, and the nutrients that they need to survive. And then in the summer, in the spring, I like to even bring my indoor house plants outside and let them get a little bit of that natural sun and water as well. So if you have plants outside and you love to garden, I want to encourage you, bring them inside this year. Try some winter gardening, maybe some citrus, even if it's not, gonna grow in your zone. Try something new, bring something inside and enjoy having a bit of life in what can be the driest or darkest season that many of us encounter. Friends, I appreciate you joining me today from my house on the floor next to my citrus. I hope that this has encouraged you to try growing outdoor plants inside this winter. You always have a space here in my indoor garden. Until next time.